Marguerite Yourcenar's Memoirs of Hadrian is one of my favourite books. Hadrian was emperor of the Roman Empire between 117 AD and 138 AD. At that time, the empire was at its fullest extent and most at peace within itself and with its neighbours. Remarkably little is known about Hadrian. So Yourcenar's book is a fictional reconstruction of his life based on the few known facts. Classicists tell me that it's a remarkably accurate and convincing account of life and beliefs in 2nd century AD Rome. Yourcenar wrote her book between 1948 and 1951. It was written in French, and the English translation was a collaboration between her and her translator, who was a close friend. So the English is of a quality which is true to what she wanted to say. Hadrian was unusual amongst emperors, and in that he spent very little time in Rome. He was a nomad. He had no fixed abode. He was constantly on the move, until finally he settled at the villa he built at Tivoli, which became, as he says in the memoirs, the tomb of my travels. The book takes the form of an account of his life written for his heir, Marcus Aurelius. He's writing it at a time when he knows that he does not have long to live. And he starts with an account of the visit from his doctor. I find this especially poignant, since two close friends of mine have just died, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about death. My dear Mark, today I went to see my physician Hermogenes, who's just returned to the villa from a rather long journey in Asia. No food could be taken before the examination, so we had made the appointment for the early morning hours. I took off my cloak and tunic and lay down on a couch. I spare you details which would be as disagreeable to you as to me, the description of the body of a man who is growing old and is about to die of a dropsical heart. Let us say only that I coughed, inhaled, and held my breath according to Hermogenes' directions. He was alarmed, in spite of himself, by the rapid progress of the disease, and was inclined to throw the blame on young Iollas, who has attended me during his absence. It is difficult to remain an emperor in presence of a physician, and difficult even to keep one's essential quality as a man. The professional eye saw in me only a mass of humours, a sorry mixture of blood and lymph. This morning it occurred to me for the first time that my body, my faithful companion and friend, truer and better known to me than my own soul, may be after all only a sly beast who will end by devouring his master. But enough. I like my body. It has served me well, and in every way, and I do not begrudge it the care it now needs. I have no faith, however, as Hermogenes still claims to have, in the miraculous virtues of herbs or the specific mixture of mineral salts which he went to the Orient to get. Subtle though he is, He has nevertheless offered me vague formulas of reassurance, too trite to deceive anyone. He knows how I hate this kind of pretense, but a man does not practice medicine for more than 30 years without some falsehood. I forgive this good servitor his endeavour to hide my death from me. Hermogenes is learned, he's even wise, and his integrity is well above that of the ordinary court physician. It will fall to my lot as a sick man to have the best of care. But no one can go beyond prescribed limits. My swollen limbs no longer sustain me through the long Roman ceremonies. I fight for breath, and I am now 60. Do not mistake me. I am not yet weak enough to yield to fearful imaginings, which are almost as absurd as illusions of hope and are certainly harder to bear. If I must deceive myself, I should prefer to stay on the side of confidence, for I shall lose no more there and shall suffer less. This approaching end is not necessarily immediate. I still retire each night with hope to see the morning. Within those absolute limits of which I was just now speaking, I can defend my position step by step and even regain a few inches of lost ground. I've nevertheless reached the age where life for every man is accepted defeat. To say that my days are numbered signifies nothing. They always were and are so for us all. But uncertainty as to the place, the time, and the manner which keeps us from distinguishing the goal towards which we continually advance, diminishes for me with the progress of my fatal malady. A man may die at any hour, but a sick man knows that he will no longer be alive in 10 years' time. My margin of doubt is a matter of months, not years. Chances of ending by a dagger thrust in the heart or by a fall from a horse are slight indeed. Plague seems unlikely, and leprosy or cancer appear definitely left behind. I no longer run the risk of falling on the frontiers, struck down by a Caledonian axe, or pierced by an arrow of the paths. Storms and tempests have failed to seize the occasions offered, and the soothsayer who told me that I should not drown seems to have been right. I shall die at Tiber or in Rome or in Naples at the farthest, and a moment's suffocation will settle the matter. Shall I be carried off by the 10th of these crises or the 100th? That is the only question. Like a traveller sailing the archipelago who sees the luminous mists lift toward evening and little by little makes out the shore, I begin to discern the profile of my death. Already, certain portions of my life are like dismantled rooms of a palace too vast for an impoverished owner to occupy in its entirety. Hadrian then goes on to describe the various rooms that he can no longer occupy, and these include hunting, riding, eating, drinking, the pleasures of love, and finally sleep. He ends this first section on the visit to the doctor as follows. Little by little, this letter, begun in order to tell you of the progress of my illness, has become the diversion of a man who no longer has the energy required for continued application to affairs of state. It has become, in fact, the written meditation of a sick man who holds audience with his memories. I propose now to do more than this. I have formed a project for telling you about my life. I offer you here, in guise of corrective, a recital stripped of preconceived ideas and of mere abstract principles. It is drawn wholly from the experience of one man who is myself. I am trusting to this examination of facts to give me some definition of myself and to judge myself, perhaps, or at the very least, to know myself better before I die. Like everyone else, I have at my disposal only 3 means of evaluating human existence. The study of self, which is the most difficult and most dangerous method, but also the most fruitful. The observation of our fellow men, who usually arrange to hide their secrets from us, or to make us believe that they have secrets where none exist. And books, with the particular errors of perspective to which they inevitably give rise. I've read nearly everything that our historians and poets have written, and even our storytellers, although the latter are considered frivolous. And to such reading, I owe perhaps more instruction than I have gathered in the somewhat varied situations of my life. The written word has taught me to listen to the human voice, much as the great unchanging statues have taught me to appreciate bodily motions. On the other hand, but more slowly, life has thrown light for me on the meaning of books. But books lie, even those that are most sincere. The less adroit, for lack of words and phrases wherein they can enclose life, retain of it but a flat and feeble likeness. Some, like Lucan, make it heavy and encumber it with a solemnity which it does not possess. Others, on the contrary, like Petronius, make life lighter than it is, like a hollow, bouncing ball, easy to toss to and fro in a universe without weight. The poets transport us into a world which is vaster and more beautiful than our own, with more ardour and sweetness, different, therefore, and in practice almost uninhabitable. The philosophers, in order to study reality pure, subject it to about the same transformations as fire or pestle make substance undergo. Nothing that we have known of a person or a fact seems to subsist in those ashes or those crystals to which they are reduced. Historians propose to us systems too perfect for explaining the past, with sequence of cause and effect much too exact and clear to have ever been entirely true. They rearrange what is dead, unresisting material, and I know that even Plutarch will never recapture Alexander. The storytellers and spinners of erotic tales are hardly more than butchers who hang up for sale morsels of meat to attract flies. I should take little comfort in a world without books, but reality is not to be found in them, because it is not their whole. Direct observation of man is a method still less satisfactory, limited as it frequently is to the cheap reflections which human malice enjoys. Rank position, all such hazards tend to restrict the field of vision for the student of mankind. My slave has totally different facilities for observing me from what I possess for observing him, but his means to do so are as limited as my own. Every morning for 20 years, old Euphorion has handed me my flask of oil and my sponge, but my knowledge of him ends with his acts of service, and his knowledge of me ends with my bath. Any effort on the part of either emperor or slave to learn more straightway produces the effect of an indiscretion. As to self-observation, I make it a rule, if only to come to terms with that individual with whom I must live up to my last day. But an intimacy of nearly 60 years' standing leaves still many chances for error. When I seek deep within me for knowledge of myself, what I find is obscure, internal, unformulated, and as secret as any complicity. A more impersonal approach yields informations as cool and detached as the theories which I could develop on the science of numbers. I employ what intelligence I have to look from above and afar upon my life, which accordingly becomes the life of another. But these two procedures for gaining knowledge are difficult and require the one a descent into oneself and the other a departure from self. Out of inertia, I tend, like everyone else, to substitute for such methods those of mere habit, thus conceiving of my life partly as the public sees it, with judgments ready-made, that is to say, poorly made, like a set pattern to which an unskilful tailor laboriously fits the cloth which we bring him. All this is equipment of unequal value. The tools are more or less dulled, but I have no other. It is with them that I must fashion for myself, as well as may be some conception of my destiny as man. When I consider my life, I'm appalled to find it a shapeless mass. A hero's existence, such as is described to us, is simple. It goes straight to the mark, like an arrow. Most men like to reduce their lives to a formula, whether in boast or lament, but always in recrimination. Their memories obligingly construct for them a clear and comprehensible past. My life has contours less firm. As is commonly the case, it is what I have not been which defines me, perhaps most aptly. A good soldier, but not a great warrior. A lover of art, but not the artist which Nero thought himself to be at his death. Capable of crime, but not laden with it. I've come to think that great men are characterized precisely by the extreme position which they take, and that their heroism consists in holding to that extremity throughout their lives. They are our poles, or our antipodes. I have occupied each of the extremes in turn, but have not kept to any one of them. Life has always drawn me away. And nevertheless, neither can I boast, like some ploughman or worthy carter, of a middle-of-the-road existence. The landscape of my days appears to be composed, like mountainous regions, of varied materials heaped up pell-mell. There I see my nature, itself composite, made up of equal parts of instinct and training. Here and there protrude the granite peaks of the inevitable, but all about is rubble from the landslips of chance. I strive to retrace my life, to find in it some plan, following a vein of lead or of gold or the course of some terranean stream. But such devices are only tricks of perspective in the memory. From time to time, in an encounter or an omen, or in a particular series of happenings, I think that I recognize the working of fate. But too many paths lead nowhere at all, and too many sums add up to nothing. To be sure, I perceive in this diversity and disorder the presence of a person, but his form seems nearly always to be shaped by the pressure of circumstances. His features are blurred like a face reflected in water. I am not of those who say that their actions bear no resemblance to them. Indeed, actions must do so, since they alone give my measure and are the sole means of engraving me upon the memory of men, or even upon my own memory. And since perhaps the very possibility of continuing to express and modify oneself by action may constitute the real difference between the state of the living and of the dead. But there is between me and these acts which compose me an indefinable hiatus, and the proof of this separation is that I feel constantly the necessity of weighing and explaining what I do and of giving account of it to myself. In such an evaluation, certain works of short duration are surely negligible. Yet occupations which have extended over a whole lifetime signify just as little. For example, it seems to me as I write this hardly important to have been emperor. Besides, a good 3/4 of my life escapes this definition by acts. The mass of my wishes, my desires, and even my projects remain nebulous and fleeting as a phantom. The remainder, the palpable part, more or less authenticated by facts, is barely more distinct, and the sequence of events is as confused as that of dreams. I have a chronology of my own which is wholly unrelated to anything based on the founding of Rome or on the era of the Olympiads. 15 years with the armies have lasted less long than a single morning at Athens. There are people whom I have seen much of throughout my life, whom I shall not recognize in Hades. Planes in space overlap likewise. Egypt and the Vale of Tempe are near, indeed, nor am I always in Tiber when I am here. Sometimes my life seems to me so commonplace as to be unworthy even of careful contemplation, let alone writing about it, and is not at all more important, even in my own eyes, than the life of any other person. Sometimes it seems to me unique, and for that very reason of no value and useless, because it cannot be reduced to the common experience of men. No one thing explains me. Neither my vices nor my virtues serve for answer. My good fortune tells more, but only at intervals, without continuity, and above all, without logical reason. Still, the mind of man is reluctant to consider itself as the product of chance or the passing result of destinies over which no God presides, least of all himself. A part of every life, even a life meriting very little regard, is spent in searching out the reasons for its existence, its starting point and its source. My own failure to discover these things has sometimes inclined me towards magical explanations and has led me to seek in the frenzies of the occult for what common sense has not taught me. When all the involved calculations prove false and the philosophers themselves have nothing more to tell us, it is excusable to turn to the random twitter of birds or toward the distant mechanism of the stars. The second excerpt I'm going to read is where Hadrian reflects on building. Hadrian was a great builder. You will be most familiar with the Pantheon, his villa at Tivoli, Hadrian's Wall, but he built much more besides. So this is what the words Yourcenar gives him when he looks back on his work as a builder. To build is to collaborate with earth, to put a human mark upon a landscape, modifying it forever thereby. The process also contributes to that slow change which makes up the history of cities. What thought and care to determine the exact site for a bridge or for a fountain, and to give a mountain road that perfect curve which is at the same time the shortest. The widening of the road to Megara transformed the shore along the Cyronian cliffs, and the 2,000-odd stadia of paved way provided with cisterns and military posts, which connected Antinopolis with the Red Sea, brought an era of security to the desert following an era of danger. For construction of a system of aqueducts in Troas, all the revenue from 500 cities of the province of Asia was not too high a price. An aqueduct for Carthage atoned in some part for the rigours of the Punic Wars. The erecting of fortifications was much like constructing dikes. The object was to find the line on which a shore or an empire can be defended, the point where the assault of waves or barbarians will be held back, stopped, or utterly broken. The beauty of the gulfs bore fruit with the opening of harbours. The founding of libraries was like constructing more public granaries, amassing reserves against a spiritual winter, which, by certain signs, in spite of myself, I see ahead. I have done much rebuilding. To reconstruct is to collaborate with time gone by, penetrating or modifying its spirit and carrying it toward a longer future. Thus, beneath the stones, we find the secret of the springs. Our life is brief. We are always referring to centuries which precede or follow our own, as if they were totally alien to us. But I have come close to them in my play with stone. These walls which I reinforce are still warm from contact with vanished bodies. Hands yet unborn will caress the shafts of these columns. The more I have meditated upon my death, and especially upon that of another, the more I have tried to add to our lives these virtually indestructible extensions. At Rome, I preferred to use our enduring brick. It returns but slowly to the earth from which it comes, and its imperceptible settling and crumbling leave a mountainous mass even when the edifice has ceased to be visibly what it was built for, a fortress, a circus, or a tomb. In Greece and in Asia, I chose the native marble, that fair substance which once cut stays so faithful to human measurements and proportions that the plan of an entire temple serves in each fragment of a broken column. Architecture is rich in possibilities more varied than Vitruvius's 4 orders would seem to allow. Our great stone blocks, like our tones in music, are amenable to endless regrouping. For the Pantheon, I turn to the ancient Etruria of augurs and soothsayers. The sunny temple of Venus, on the contrary, is a round of Ionic forms, a profusion of white and pale rose columns clustered about the voluptuous goddess whence sprang the race of Caesar. The Olympian of Athens, built on the plain, had to be an exact counterpoint to the Parthenon on its hill. Vastness opposed to perfection, ardour kneeling before calm, splendour at the feet of beauty. The chapels of Antinous and his temples were magic chambers, commemorating a mysterious passage between life and death. These shrines to an overpowering joy and grief were places of prayer and evocation of the dead. There I gave myself over to my sorrow. My tomb on the bank of the Tiber reproduces on a gigantic scale the ancient vaults of the Appian Way, but its very proportions transform it, recalling Ctesiphon and Babylon with their terraces and towers by which man seeks to climb nearer the stars. Sepulchral Egypt provided the plan for the obelisks and rows of sphinxes of that cenotaph, which forces upon a vaguely hostile Rome the memory of the friend forever mourned. The villa was the tomb of my travels, the last encampment of the nomad, the equivalent, though in marble, of the tents and pavilions of the princes of Asia. Almost everything that appeals to our taste has already been tried in the world of forms. I turn toward the realm of colour. Jasper as green as the depths of the sea, porphyry dense as flesh, basalt and sombre obsidian. The crimson of the hangings was adorned with more and more intricate embroideries. The mosaics of the walls or pavements were never too golden, too white, or too dark. Each building stone was the strange concretion of a will, a memory, and sometimes a challenge. Each structure was the chart of a dream. Plotinopolis, Hadrianopolis, Antinopolis, Hadrianopterai, I have multiplied these human beehives as much as possible. Plumber and mason, engineer and architect preside at the births of cities. The operation also requires certain magical gifts. In a world still largely made up of woods, desert and uncultivated plain, a city is indeed a fine sight with its paved streets, its temple to some god or other, its public baths and toilets, a shop where the barber discusses with his clients the news from Rome, its pastry shop, shoe store, and perhaps a bookshop, its doctor's sign, and a theatre where from time to time a comedy of Terence is played. Our men of fashion complain of the uniformity of our cities. They suffer in seeing everywhere the same statue of the emperor, the same water pipes. They are wrong. The beauty of Nîmes is wholly different from that of Arles. But that very uniformity, to be found now on 3 continents, reassures the traveller, as does the sight of a milestone. Even the dullest of our towns have their comforting significance as shelters and posting stops. A city, that framework constructed by men, for men, monotonous if you will, but only as a wax cells laden with honey, a place of meeting and exchange, where peasants come to sell their produce and linger to gape and stare at the paintings of a portico. My cities were born of encounters, both my own encounters with given corners of the earth and the conjunction of my plans as emperor with the incidents of my personal life. Plotinopolis grew from the need to establish new market towns in Thrace, but also from the tender desire to honour Trajan's widow Plotina. Hadrianotherae is designed to serve as a trading town for the forest dwellers of Asia Minor. At first it had been for me a summer retreat, with its forest full of wild game, its hunting lodge of rough-hewn logs, below the hill of the god Attis, and the headlong stream where we bathed each morning. Hadrianopolis in Epirus reopened an urban centre in the heart of an impoverished province. It owes its start to a visit which I made to the Oracle of Dodona. Hadrianopolis in Thrace, an agricultural and military outpost strategically placed on the edge of barbarian lands, is populated by veterans of the Sarmatian Wars. I know at first hand the strength and the weakness of each one of those men, their names, the number of their years of service and of their wounds. Antinopolis, dearest of all, born on the site of sorrow, is confined to a narrow band of arid soil between the river and the cliffs. I was only the more desirous, therefore, to enrich it with other resources, trade with India, river traffic, and the learned graces of a Greek metropolis. There is not a place on earth that I care less to revisit, but there are few to which I have devoted more pains. Our art is perfect, that is to say, completed, but its perfection can be modulated as finely as can a pure voice. We still have the chance to play with skill the game of perpetual approach to or withdrawal from that solution found once for all. We may go to the limit of control or excess and enclose within that beauteous sphere innumerable new constructions.